Okay folks, if this video series turns out anything like what I have in my head as I sit here recording it, hopefully this will be the longest video, and it'll also be the only video that really delves into any kind of theory about how Linux works, because that's not what this is about. We're supposed to be talking about the basics. Now, I'd rather not do this video if I'm honest, but I think it's kind of necessary to introduce at least the concept of a file system tree, so that if you guys can understand how files are laid out and represented inside a Linux computer, navigating through the computer using command line becomes quite easy, even if you're only coming from the background of using a graphical user interface like Windows. So, in the first half of this, I'm going to be quite PowerPoint heavy, and I'm going to introduce some concepts, and then in the second half, I'm going to switch over to a Linux terminal and just show you it in action. So as I said, the first thing I want to introduce is the idea of a file system tree and the idea of absolute paths. What we're looking at here is a representation of how files are represented inside a Linux system. This is called the file system tree. Normally you'll see the tree presented the other way around. You'll see the root at the top and everything else at the bottom. But I'm a biologist. Trees have roots on the bottom, and I refuse to change my ways, and this is my show. So in my diagram, the root is on the bottom. Essentially what we're looking at here is this concept that every single file and every single directory or folder inside a Linux computer sits ultimately inside a single folder called the root directory. So by way of example, this image up here, cat1.jpg, is a file which sits inside the directory pics, which sits inside Barry, sits inside home, and then sits inside root. Similarly, this one up here, private.txt, sits inside secret, inside Barry, inside home, inside root. Everything ultimately leads back to root. Now what this means is for every single file and directory, everything in the computer, we can create an address for it, something that references it. And this is represented as the route you need to take to get from the root directory to the file or directory of interest. So in this case, the file cat1.jpg has what's called an absolute path, an address, which is / representing the root directory, and then the list of all the directories that we need to traverse in order to get from root to our file. So in this case it's root, home, Barry, pics, and then the file name cat1.jpg. Similarly, this one up here would be /root, home, Barry, secret, private.txt. Okay? So a brief recap. Every single file is connected to the root directory, or more accurately sits inside the root directory. And the absolute path is an address which describes how to get to your file of interest starting at the root directory. Now there's something else I'm going to need to introduce, because I think it might be a bit of an alien concept if you've only interacted with computers through a graphical user interface and you've never used a terminal. And this is the idea of a working directory, and the idea that a user has a location inside the system. So because I'm using a Windows computer, I can kind of illustrate this, if I just jump out of PowerPoint for a second. So in a Windows system, or at least any system that uses a graphical user interface, I, the user, can exist in multiple places at once. So by way of example, I can simultaneously be looking into this directory, which contains music, and this directory, which contains a bunch of images. I'm kind of like the proverbial man in black. I'm outside the system, above it, beyond it. I can exist and look into multiple directories at the same time. Now, the same is not really true when working inside a Linux system, or at least working inside a system through a command line. Inside a command line, the user has a location, which we call the working directory. Now, bear with me. When a user logs on to a Linux system, they're dumped into what's called the home directory. So every user has a home directory that they go to when they log in. They're just automatically going there. So this means when you log in, your working directory will be your home directory. So if I log into a Linux terminal and I type this command, pwd, which stands for print working directory, what it should do is return the absolute path of my home directory. You can think of your working directory as being like a game piece, and you can think of the file system tree as being a game board. So in order to do stuff, I need to move my game piece to where I want to be. And I do that using the change directory command. So if I am sitting in my home directory and I run this command, ls, which stands for list, I'll cover this in another video, it'll show me the contents of this directory, which are the folders pics, works, and secret. If I then type cd, which means change directory, to one of these, it's kind of like moving my game piece to the next square in the game board. I'm now moved my working directory from here to here. If I now run the print working directory command, you'll see that it's changed. I'm now sitting in home Barry Pics for my working directory. And if I run the list command without any arguments, it'll show me the contents of this folder, which are cat1 and cat2.jpg. If I type change directory followed by this operator, ... I will go back down one level in the file system tree. So ... is effectively shorthand for parent directory. So now I say cd ... and I was here, it means go to the parent directory of what I'm currently in, which is this one, Barry. Again, if I do the print working directory command, it will show you I'm now here. If I run it again, cd ... I will jump to here, because this is the parent directory of the one I was just in. And eventually, if I do it enough, I'll end up back at the root directory. Finally, if you put in the change directory command, just cd, without any arguments, so no address and no ... it'll just jump you directly back to your home directory. So I've actually forgotten this on this presentation, but what I should be showing you is your location is now your home directory, and if you were to use a print working directory command, you would get /home/Barry in this case. Okay, so that's an effective way, well, not an effective way, it's a way of moving through a Linux system, but it's also very clunky moving one folder at a time. So this is where absolute paths come in handy. So let's say that I was sitting out here in a folder called /user, and I wanted to go to this one, pics. Now, using only the commands that were in the previous slide, what I could do is cd ... to get to root, and then cd home, cd Barry, cd pics, which is a lot of commands just to get from A to B. However, if I already know the address of where I want to go to, let's say I already know that there is a folder called pics up here, and I know the absolute path, I can just type in cd and then the path to where I want to be. So in this case, it doesn't matter where I am. If I just type cd and then the absolute path to where I want to go, I'll end up just effectively teleporting my piece across the game board, and my working directory will be now pics. Similarly, if I want to jump from pics to this one, which is root etc, I would just type cd/etc, and I wouldn't have to go through the system tree, I would just teleport from pics to etc. Similarly, if I want to go to the root, it's just cd/, so cd root. Okay, the last thing we're going to do in PowerPoint is introduce the idea of a relative path. So an absolute path, as we've discussed, tells you how to get from the root directory to a file. A relative path tells you how to get from one location to another. So where you currently are to where you want to be. And in the context of what I'm talking about just now, I mean how to get from your working directory, where you are, to a file of interest. Now you could do this using absolute paths, but that can be very clunky, particularly if you're very, very deep into the file tree. So another option is, instead of giving the full absolute path of where you want to go to, you just type in what's called an absolute path. So in this case, it's a combination. So if I'm sitting in pics, I would type cd ... to go to parent directory, then /secret. What this means is move from here to my parent directory, and then from that one to secret. It's effectively like taking a shortcut. Rather than going to the root directory and then all the way back up, you just give it the route that gets from where you are to where you want to be. Yeah, so that's all I really want to say about absolute paths and relative paths. So what I'm going to do now is jump out of this and jump into a Linux terminal. So just for a bit of context, I'm actually using a program called Putty, and what I've connected to is just a little Raspberry Pi that's connected to my home network. And I've just logged in and cleared the window. I've not done anything else. So let's just look at these commands we've talked about. Let's use the print working directory command, pwd. So as I said, when you first log in without doing anything else, it'll dump you to your user's home directory, which in my case is /home/pi. You'll also, in most systems, know that you're in your home directory because you'll have this little tilde at the end of your tooltip string. The tilde is shorthand for your working directory. If I type ls list, you can see all the things that are contained in this directory that I'm currently in. So I've got a bunch of folders. So there's logs, there's photo backup, sys backup, etc. And let's say that I want to go to logs. I would do cd logs. And if I run the list command, you'll see the contents of logs. It's a bunch of, well, log files that come out of scripts that I've written that aren't particularly of interest for this video. Similarly, if I go cd ... I go back to where I was, which is my working directory. It's worth noting that even though I'm in this directory, I can still run commands on other ones that are sitting inside it. So I could do ls logs, and despite the fact that my working directory was my home directory, I can use ls and then the relative path to get to a file to run commands on it. But let's not get bogged down in the details here. Let's stick with the basics. I'm in my home directory, and I just want to show you what happens if you keep going backwards. So I'm going to change directory to parent directory, okay? And print, you can see I'm now in root home. If I do cd ... again to go to the parent directory, and if I show you again where I am, you can see I'm now in the root directory. What's interesting, if I do cd ... and try to go to the parent of the root directory, I just end up back at the root directory. Because this is what I was trying to fix in your head earlier when I showed you the file system tree. There is nothing beyond root. Everything ultimately sits inside it. And if I try to go to the parent of root, I just end up back at root. Just by way of demonstration, if I type cd without any other context and just hit enter, you already noticed what's happened. My little tooltip string now ends with a tilde, but just to confirm it, print working directory, I'm back at my home. So that's basically it in a nutshell. I realize I've run a lot of commands that haven't necessarily been very well explained, but the only ones I want you to take away from this video are change directory, cd, to move between different directories, and pwd, print working directory, to show where you are. Okay? That's the end of today's video.